Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Toronto Bach Festival online panel on diversity in early music. My name is John Aberger. I'm the artistic director of the Toronto Bach Festival, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this discussion this afternoon. We are very pleased at the Toronto Bach Festival to welcome Natasha Gauthier, our moderator, who will shepherd us through this forum. And Natasha has helped us assemble a very interesting panel from a wide range of backgrounds in the arts. To state what's obvious, we don't expect to resolve any of these important issues today, but we at the Toronto Bach Festival want to take advantage of this historic moment and the spirit of this time in our lives to take a hard look at what these issues are and hopefully gain some insight into how we might begin to address them. Before I introduce the panel and hand it over to Natasha, however, I want to acknowledge that the land on which the Toronto Bach Festival operates has for thousands of years been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and to practice our art on this land. Our panel today, I'll introduce to you now. Asitha Tennekoon, based in Toronto, is a tenor. He is the founder of Aspirare Vocal Collective and a co-founder of Amplified Opera. Jennifer Bowman is the Director of Education at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., USA. Sallynee Amawat is a freelance violinist and a founding member of Infusion Baroque ensemble based in Montreal, Canada. Wade Davis is a freelance Baroque cellist based in Baltimore, Maryland, USA, and is a founding member of the ensemble S'amusante. Mahan Esfahani is a solo harpsichordist based in Europe, and he's joining us today in a pre-recorded message. And finally, our moderator today, Natasha Gauthier, is an author and noted arts journalist based in Ottawa. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Natasha. Thank you very much.
So I will ask Sallynee to start.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sallynee Amawat, and I am currently residing in Montreal. I'm originally from the US, and I also lived in Thailand for several years. I'm a Baroque violinist, and I perform with an ensemble called Infusion Baroque. It's a Montreal-based ensemble, as well as the many wonderful early music ensembles in Montreal. First of all, I want to thank the Toronto Bach Festival for giving us this opportunity to speak about a topic that is not always, I should say, it has never been easy to talk about. And I appreciate the willingness for people to listen and to especially listen to the voices of people of color. I guess my first experience, or the first time I was made to realize that I was perhaps different from my colleagues in early music, was actually about 10 years ago when I was doing auditions for master's degree in early music performance. And for one of the auditions that I attended, after the performance part, there's always a little bit of a chat with the panelists in the audition afterwards. And one of the questions that they asked me was if I spoke any other languages. At the time, I speak English and I'm also fluent in Thai. So that was my answer. And when they found out that I spoke Thai, their reaction was sort of this, I guess, a very casual dismissal. And they essentially said, well, that's not going to help you at all in this. And I think it was I understand what they were asking me, which was essentially if I spoke Italian, French, German, or Dutch, or any of the other European languages that our historical treatises are written in. But I think that the answer that they gave me at that moment in its casualness and in this sort of flippant dismissal of a language that I spoke that is part of my identity. At the time, I didn't think about it. It has stuck with me for many years, and I didn't quite understand in that moment what the meaning behind it was or why. But after several years and sort of being in this world of early music, I'm starting to understand what the value of language is, and if you speak one language, it's valuable, and if you speak another, it's maybe not as valuable. And I just want to also share one other very recent experience, and this was actually this panel. We had a meeting on Monday to prepare for this upcoming discussion. And I realized in that moment that this is the first time that I've been with a group of people of color in early music. And that to me was such an extraordinary revelation, and an exciting one. And again, I just want to express how grateful I am for this experience and how excited I am to meet and speak with all of you. And I hope that this is just the first of many conversations.
Thank you, Sallynee, for that very honest expression of your experiences. Next, we'll speak to Wade Davis, wonderful cellist. Wade, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I'm Wade Davis, Baroque cellist. I live in Baltimore, Maryland. I've been playing Baroque cello since 2008, working professionally since 2010, I think. I love playing Baroque cello. I, started it because I really wanted to play, Bach cello suites sort of correctly. And that's really been my sort of goal and passion, and of course to play the other music of the period, equally well, and just to explore it all really, from the sort of modern perspective. Of course, moving into early music, a lot of that stuff isn't explored, and so really having a chance to sit down with Vivaldi and Delapago and Delabacco and Gabrielli, and those composers that are sort of off the beaten path, so to speak. It's just been really great to explore it from a scholarly standpoint as well as a performance standpoint. So that's really been my joy and my work in Baroque cello. And I have to say that I guess my anecdote would be just sort of paired with my, I guess you could say, virtuosity and sort of extreme performance dynamic that I brought with me from modern. About, I guess you could say, 10 years ago, when I was in a festival at the Bay Area. It was in San Francisco, and I was basically told by the bass coach that, after being told by the cello coach, move more, you're such a beautiful player, express it more, move more. Then I was told by this bass coach, essentially, I wasn't being clear enough, and I wasn't sort of cueing right. And I mean, it was to the point where this person took my cello and tried to demonstrate, and I'll just say they weren't a cellist. So, but all that's to say is that's kind of when I realized, okay, I'm looked at a certain way that maybe other people aren't. And that's when I just sort of realized, okay, that's what I'm going to be dealing with on a real level.
Thank you, Wade. Next, we will hear from Asitha, and I need to share a story about the first time that I met Asitha, who was performing in, I think it was the Bach Magnificat here, doing the tenor solos with an ensemble here in Ottawa, not an exclusively early music ensemble, but one that plays a lot of that repertoire. And I had already been booked to do a profile and interview of Asitha for Opera Canada as a young up-and-coming tenor. And I went to this concert because I was reviewing it. And then I went backstage to introduce myself face to face, because I always like meeting the people that I'm interviewing in person beforehand. It's always nice and helpful. And so I went backstage, and Asitha and I were chatting, and the conductor came by. And this conductor, I mean, he's known me, he knows me, he knows who I am. You know, I was not that large a town, and the classical music world is small, and I'm known in this area. So, and he comes by and he says, "Oh, I didn't realize the two of you were related." And of course, that was an unbelievably awkward moment for both of us. The assumption, the presumption that two South Asian people at a concert must be related somehow. It's the kind of comment that you would never make that assumption of two white people talking together after a concert. And so I corrected him quite quickly, and I said, you know that not all brown people are related, right? And I think he turned red a bit and realized that he'd made a faux pas. But I thought that illustrated the kind of casual microaggression that many people of color face on a regular basis in this industry. And with that story, Asitha, I will throw it over to you.
Thanks for that introduction, Natasha. Yeah. I had some technical difficulties, so I had to switch devices. So I hope everyone can hear me well right now. Thanks. I'm coming to you from Victoria today. I'm in the middle of a rehearsal actually with the Pacific Opera Victoria, so I'm upstairs in their offices right now. My name is Asitha Tennekoon. I go by the pronouns he, him. And I was born and raised in Sri Lanka, and that I was introduced to classical music, and especially early music, choral music, through the church. I grew up Anglican, and I'm based out of Toronto now. And in addition to the story that Natasha shared, one of the other stories I have is being part of a youth choir project in Germany, where they invited singers from all parts of the world to be part of a choir. And I remember standing next to this gentleman who was also in the tenor section, and I made a mistake in one of the phrases we were singing. We were singing the St. Matthew Passion, and when we were getting our notes after that, I remember him looking at me and saying, "You know, you're lucky you're Sri Lankan and you're from Sri Lanka, because that means you'll get hired more." And so that was one of the first moments for me to realize that there, again, like so many of us have shared, that I am looked at differently, regardless of, the reality that you have to be at a certain level of capability in order to be hired in the first place. So yeah, that's my story. And I'm grateful to be sharing this space with wonderful artists and administrators. And thank you to the Toronto Bach Festival as well for having us. Thanks.
Thank you, Asitha. And we have Jennifer next. Jennifer, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Natasha. And thank you to the Toronto Bach Festival. Just like everyone has said, it's really special to be in this place with these amazing artists and administrators of color. It's really unique in early music. My pronouns are she and her. I am based outside of Washington, D.C. in the ancestral and stolen land of the Powhatan tribe. I've been practicing all day, and I wanted to acknowledge their legacy today. Right now, I serve as Director of Music Education at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C., but I have been connected to early music since college in some way. So Dido and Aeneas was my first opera in college. Ordo Virtutum was my first starring role when I was in graduate school. And I had the pleasure of serving as the consort manager for 6 seasons at the Folger Consort in Washington, D.C. So it's always been a music I really enjoy and love, classical music, all of it. But I would say my experience that I wanted to share has always been the level of gatekeeping involved in the genre. Part of my role when I was working with the Folger and also for a short time with the Washington Bach Consort is that wherever I was doing activities with the organizations, there was inevitably someone who would come up and ask me how I got there. They wanted to know like what was my background that got me to this concert, this place. I told the group a story about an intern at the Stratford Festival, the music section of it, who, when I entered a room, asked me lots of questions about, so what job are you here? How did you get to this place? And I realized that I was rattling off my resume to someone that didn't even work for the festival. And I had to stop myself and realize I don't need to explain myself everywhere that I go. And unfortunately, it is very rare to see a Black woman in early music. It's very rare to see a Black woman who works as an administrator or artist manager in early music. So I recognize the uniqueness of it, but never really appreciated the questioning and the interrogation of why I deserve to be in a space. Back to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Before we move on to the crux of the discussion and questions, I want to play a video that was shared with us by Mahan Esfahani, who was supposed to be with us today. Fantastic harpsichordist, Deutsche Grammophon recording artist. He's also active in the contemporary music field, and his recent recording of 20th and 21st century harpsichord works just won a very, very prestigious German Music Critics Award. And he had a last minute scheduling conflict because of American Thanksgiving, and so couldn't be here, but he did send us a video to share some of his thoughts. I met Mahan through social media, through Twitter, and this is certainly a topic that he's given a lot of thought to throughout his career. So I'm going to attempt to share this video with you all now, and hopefully this works.
Good evening. My name is Mahan Esfahani. I'm a harpsichordist, and I live in Prague in the Czech Republic. I've lived in Europe for almost 15 years now. Anyway, I'm really sorry that I cannot do the panel with you all for Toronto Bach Festival. As it happens, I'll be home, which is quite rare, but of course this has been a special year. And so I'll be having Thanksgiving dinner, which I never get to have. And so as a result, I'll be in Thanksgiving dinner with members of my household. And as a result, I can't join the panel, so I'm sorry for that. By way of introduction, I do want to say that I'm been deeply inspired by my contact by the other people, by my contact with the other people on the panel, and in particular by Natasha Gauthier, who organized this. So thank you and big respect. I did just want to say there are a number of things I would like to see addressed on this panel. One of them is the issue of empathy. The fact that early music, particularly in North America, I think more than in Europe, that early music, there's a kind of group culture, a sort of clannish culture, which lacks empathy for those who are outside of its experiences. Now, oftentimes, because of the way American society and many other societies are constructed, that is racial in its in the way that it comes out, because of race and socioeconomic status in the United States are related. Having said that, I have also seen many of the experiences that I went through and which caused me to just basically pack up and leave the U.S. I saw also extended to people who may have come from who may have nonetheless been white or been of a pan-European background, and who maybe came from a poorer background. Maybe went to state universities. Didn't maybe came from the Midwest. Things like that. So I think that I'd like to see that topic of empathy discussed and explored, because I think race is only one of those aspects. And I think if we start to look at that, we'll see that we have a lot in common with a lot of people who are sidelined, who maybe aren't given parity in terms of appreciation and opportunities in early music, who might be white. I hope that made sense. I'm sort of speaking word salad here, but anyway. So that's one topic I'd like to see discussed. Another one is accountability. That's to say, accountability of early music organizations. Now, the problem is that many of these organizations are relatively small. They're in the major urban centers, but relatively they're small, and so and the scene itself is relatively small. So basically, and I think everyone knows this, no one is willing to talk about it, but basically, if you get on the wrong side of one or two people in the whole of the U.S., which is quite a big country, you're done. It's very difficult for you to go anywhere, and there's no accountability. There's a whole scene of people who derive work from maybe 5 or 6 people doing all the contracting or doing all the decision making, deciding the one or maybe the 2 big festivals that are really there. And so if you're on the wrong side of that, especially because there are many very lazy programmers who basically just go to those 1 or 2 festivals to decide their seasons, then there's no accountability. Just to speak about my own experience, I find that it doesn't matter how hard I work or how excellent I am or what I've achieved in Europe, or for that matter, what I've achieved in the mainstream of classical music. You might know I spend maybe a good 50% of my time with new music, with experimental music, with free improvisation and contemporary music. That's partly because I really got tired of the nonsense in early music as a whole. Just on the social scale of it, I found that new music was a much more welcoming community. Likewise, I noticed that people cared much more about their feelings and about pleasing the right people rather than about quality. Now, the interesting thing is that early music, I'm sorry to say it, on the scale of classical music as a whole, register is pretty small potatoes, both in terms of the fees that are paid, even to soloists. The fees are quite small, and so I found that by playing a mainstream series, like I've done in Europe and in America and Asia, that I could be making fees 3, 4, 5 times as large as a soloist, and that's just simply not there in early music. So one feels like the battles are so harsh because the stakes are so small. And that's I think a real problem, that there's no accountability there. They're kind of running on borrowed time, I think, economically and financially, because there's a whole generation of people who basically bought property or were able to live in city centers and certain places where younger people can't afford to be. Right, and then one goes, if one plays in a group, there are these gigs and these tours, and then if one can't afford to go eat out with the others, and one suffers in terms of social capital and these things. So I think this accountability issue, this has to be discussed. And I was asked, I'm going to make this short, I'm going to wrap up in a minute. I was asked to share an experience which for me meant everything. As I pointed out, I did leave a good 15 years ago. When I had hair, look, I used to have hair. And well, my experiences, I've played Carnegie Hall a number of times. I've played Lincoln Center. I've played, LA Phil, and and of course most of the major places in Europe, and a lot of the major symphony orchestras, which is to say modern symphony orchestras. I've played concertos with. Never played with a Baroque orchestra in the United States. Never got asked, funny enough. And then when you go to a lot of these large modern orchestras, they can fill a hall 3 or 4 nights in a row, even if you're playing Bach concertos. And the early music people kind of avoid it. They think it's this sort of terrible aberration, but they're filling big halls. And so I'm able to do that with major orchestras. I can do recordings with major orchestras and conductors. But I have yet to play at an American early music festival or series, and they're happy to invite either equal Europeans at best or possibly Europeans with a somewhat slimmer CV. And so the message is very obvious. Now, no one's perfect. Some people are nice, some people aren't nice, and we've all misstepped. I think when I was younger, I probably certainly misstepped a couple times, but there's this expectation for people who are minorities and who don't fit in to be perfect. That we have to be perfect in order to get parity. I'm not asking for special treatment. This is something I want to make clear, and I complained about this issue before, and I was attacked from all sides in American early music, and no one defended me, actually, in that field. And they said, well, he should be happy. He had a great career, and he's made plenty of money, so what's he complaining about? Well, again, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equal treatment. And equal treatment means parity of opportunity, and parity to just be treated like anyone else. And you know, I gave my life to this art form, and I feel like the community of people who share that art from the United States have made it very clear that I don't belong. And that is a form of gatekeeping, because it's a way of saying, no matter what you've done, no matter who you are, no matter your achievements, we decide what's artistically right. And that is very unhealthy. And I think there is a racist and a classist element to that. And funny enough, I actually come from an upper middle class family. So it's not a class issue there. It's not an access issue for me. My access was fine to education, but there is a race issue. Believe it, there's a race issue. I did have a couple experiences, and if I ever have to say those names, I'll say them, where it was said, well, you know, it's better we not ask him in an American context because, you know, people want to see European or European style names. And I think we know what that means. So I left. This is the first engagement I have with American early music since 2006. And I hope it's not the last. Just sitting and talking with this panel the other night gave me a lot of hope. Makes me feel very emotional. I really wish you the best. And do God's work for us on our behalf. So good night. Happy Thanksgiving.
Wow, that was amazing. A lot to unpack there. Can everyone hear me again? So let's go right into it with this idea of when we talk about diversity, equality, and inclusion in early music, you know, race is a big part of it, but it's not just race, as Mahan said. It's also, there's an element of classism as well. There's an element of Eurocentricity in programming, in choice of venues, even in the way outreach is often done in schools, where there can be a bit of a, you know, European savior complex. Oh, we're going into these inner city schools and taking, you know, our wonderful music to these poor, unfortunate kids. And it's very top down. They're not starting from a position of seeing these kids or these communities as equal. Jennifer, let me start with you. You know, the issues that are so intertwined of class and race and accessibility. In your experience as an administrator, what are some ways to address those and start breaking down those silos and those prejudices?
Yeah, I think now in my career, I have this really interesting lens that I'm able to look at the arts in, because I work with so many young people who are, you know, having aspirations to do the thing, or just, you know, could have the opportunity to just see the thing sometimes. And I think one of the things that we have to really be vigilant of is making assumptions about people of different communities, whether it's different races, whether it's our young people, and making the assumption that they either won't be interested in it, it's something they can't handle, because that oftentimes affects everything from our outreach, the way that we market and program. That can also sometimes affect, again, what you were saying before, like having a focus on Eurocentric composers when early music or music of that period, music was happening all over the world. So why is this type of early music considered early music and the music of other cultures not considered to be a part of that? So I think that sometimes because we have sort of class, racial, ethnic, whatever, misconceptions about other people, we don't even give them an opportunity to experience it and decide if they don't like it, or decide if they love it, decide if they want to be a part of it, decide they don't want to be a part of it. So I'm always asking people to sort of think of that, think of why we assume that certain communities don't want to be a part of our art form, our genre, and then ask, have we actually given them the opportunity to be a part of our art form and our genre?
Now, I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to throw this to the panel because I think it's fundamental. How important is representation? You know, why is it important? Why is it important for little Black and brown kids to see people who look like them on stage? Not only on stage, but you know, also volunteers who welcome them when they go to the concert, or people that they see, you know, they might see working in the back of the house. Why is that important? Asitha.
My reaction to that question is just to go back to an experience I had last year, and I was a soloist with a choir, premiering a work, and the children's choir that was a part of it, there was a Sri Lankan child in the children's choir, and after the concert, she came up to me with her mother, and her mother said, "It's so wonderful to see someone from our background doing this thing," and looked at her child, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically she said it just shows us that we can do this as well, and that it's not that it is worth my child being a part of this world and a part of this art form. So that in itself, I mean, there's so many, there's a plethora of reasons, but that for me immediately jumps out as being my response to that question, Natasha. Thanks.
Thanks. Sallynee, anything to add to that?
I think, first of all, that was such a touching story, Asitha. I got kind of a little bit emotional about that. I totally agree. I think that for every child that aspires to be anything, you know, when they grow up, it's important to have role models. And if you can't see yourself in this position, then you don't think that it's for you. And you know, this is something that I experienced also, you know, in terms of my ensemble's work with women composers and traveling to different parts of the US and going on tour and having not you know, with us not knowing, not realizing that we're all women, but having people point it out to us, but also having mothers come up to us, say that it's important for them to see their little girls see women as professional musicians on stage. You know, this is a, it's so important for children to be able to dream that they can do something, you know, if they can see themselves doing it. So yeah, that's my answer.
Wade, how about you? Is that something you're conscious of, like of the opportunity to be a role model for others?
Very much so. When I was in Boston, I just had the opportunity to work with a young gentleman who literally was just in the back of the church where I was performing and rehearsing. And, you know, I was just talking on my cell phone outside, and he saw me with my case. And, you know, I had on jeans and a hoodie and, you know, Tim's, you know, and he came up to me and was like, "Hey, what's that instrument? Like, will you show me your instrument?" And I took him inside the sanctuary and, you know, really took the time to explain to him what the cello is, how, you know, it sits right here and what the bow hold is like. And I know that he appreciated that moment because somebody who looked like him really took him seriously, who's at a certain level, you know. And then in that same weekend, I got a letter via email from a mother of a young lady, Black young lady in Boston who is a cellist. And the letter basically said that she was going to skip her last basketball game of the season to come and see me play because when she read that, I was a, professional Baroque cellist, she felt that it wasn't so odd of an interest for her as a 15-year-old girl. And so for me, that's specifically the thing that just continues to keep me going.
And basketball is a religion in Boston, so.
Right.
I'm going to ask the panel to talk about some of the barriers. I mean, these are difficult conversations, for organizations to be having. One thing that I found, as entrenched as classical music can be, and Mahan kind of alluded to this, because early music sees itself still as kind of an underdog in that world. There's perhaps a blind spot, an even larger blind spot about the exclusionary practices that can exist. And it's something I've heard and I've seen in social media conversations, like, oh no, social media, early music it's not racist, it's completely inclusive, it's completely welcoming, anybody could be welcoming. And yet you have people like yourselves who are saying, that isn't true. So what needs to be done to get that? And change can be scary as well. We all know this, but really what needs to happen for there to be that impulsion to get things moving? And I'm thinking, changes that need to happen, not only at the administrative level, but at the board level, at the volunteer level, like through the whole, all the layers of the cake that need to be involved. Who would like to go first? Wade, maybe you can start.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there has to be what you said, on all levels of the cake. We have to see representation on all levels of the cake. Otherwise, it's just, I mean, I hate to sound trite, but completely without flavor. I mean, it goes back to something that we were talking about, on Tuesday, just the fact that, like, how are people going to want to aspire to something if they don't see anybody, in the groups that looks like them, volunteering, donors, who look like them, people on the board, people on outreach boards. I mean, it has to be, like you said, all across the board. And I think part of it really starts with specifics about initiatives, because, a lot of these groups are saying, oh, diversity initiatives, but what they're really going to do is turn around and hire an Asian woman or a Latinx woman. They're still not going to hire the Black man. I mean, that's literally been my experience. And I'm not trying to sort of, discount anyone's talent, because that's not what I'm doing here. Again, I'm asking for parity, like Mahan said, but it's also a point of real accountability. Because I mean, some of these groups, like we said in the other panel, Natasha, you said it beautifully, they might have hired, a Black oboist, and then that person wasn't the most amazing. Then they'll say, oh, well, they weren't amazing, but look, we hired one Black person, so that's enough for now. But it's not enough. It's never going to be enough. You know what I mean? It's never going to be enough.
That's something that the panel we met, before this to talk, and one of the things, and this has come up as well in conversations I've had about women in senior management positions at orchestras and opera companies, and it's like the majority. So in that case, so men or a white person, if they're bad at what they do, if they fail for themselves. It's a personal failure. Whereas if you're a Black or brown artist and you get hired and it's seen as, oh, look at this wonderful opportunity that we are bestowing upon you. And if, the concert doesn't sell well, or if the reviews are mediocre, your failure is seen as you're failing for your whole community. And that's another issue of inequality that I think needs to be discussed, where, you know, parity, it's also parity of mediocrity. It's parity of failure. It's being allowed to fail as an individual and not have someone say, oh, well, you know, we presented that program of music by Hispanic composers. It didn't sell that well, so let's never do that again, right? Sallynee, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, like you said, we were talking about that, how I think this definition of diversity and inclusion is still, I think, is still yet to be understood or properly defined in most organizations. And it doesn't just mean programming one piece by a Black composer for the whole season or ever in the history of the organization. You know, it means, you know, fundamental and structural change. And, you know, as an artist, but as an artist who works administer their own ensemble, I work a lot of grants, and you know, it's hard, you know, as we work in this field that is super competitive, that is always getting, you know, the top of the list to have budget cuts. And, you know, essentially we're all sort of fighting for the same, you know, slice of a very small pie. And I think, it was said earlier that, you know, change is hard. Change doesn't happen overnight and it's not easy. But I think the one thing that will motivate most organizations to change is, you know, for those that give money to these organizations to get behind this and to say, well, we'll fund your project if you can demonstrate a level of diversity within your organization and define what that means, you know. Otherwise, I see this being like so many topics where we're so invested in this discussion. We all want change. We all want the same thing, but then it sort of fizzles out, you know, over time. And then we're sort of back to square one. So I think we need to address what is it that really motivates, drives our industry, you know, funding sources and audiences. And these are the people that have the loudest voice.
Can I respond to that comment, actually? Please. So I think it's really important to mention the fizzling out, because I see it happening now with organizations here in the States, that after the racial reckoning that happened here in June, and there are a lot of statements, there are a lot of Black squares on Instagram pages, you know, a lot of public actions, but I see organizations dealing with some issue fatigue. And kind of wanting to go back to not talking about it again. But, you know, I remind my colleagues, I remind people that I work with in the field that these problems didn't just start in June of 2020. These problems were happening before. So the stories that you're hearing today are not things that just happened to these individuals, you know, in the last 5 months. They've been happening for years. They've been happening for decades for some people. So it's not going to be something that we can deal with like just like that. It's not going to be something that has very quick metrics, because there is some level of needing to change the hearts and minds of people in order to make these changes possible. So I really implore everybody to sit with the discomfort and know that it's going to be uncomfortable for a long time if you're doing it right. But hopefully, you know, we can all come to some resolution where we are able to achieve, you know, whatever diversity and inclusion in early music and classical music means to us.
And if I could just sort of join in on what Jennifer was saying, you know, part of the change has to be that there stops being the use of these tokens, because that's a really big part of it. And oftentimes what happens with these tokens is that they themselves become gatekeepers. They themselves are the ones telling other people, oh, don't say anything about this, don't say anything about that. Because when I'll just say an unsolicited message sent to me from a board member of EMA, I had another board member essentially keep on trying to write to me and smooth it over. And I was just like, you're not gonna smooth this over. Like, the rest of you didn't feel the need to write something to me. So the fact that this one person did tells me something. You don't need to explain it away. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, so that's another part that's going to have to really change. Some of these tokens are going to have to realize that they're tokens. And that's a really hard realization. I mean, and
And I
that's all
think
I'm about that.
I think there's a difference too between, and we talked about this a little bit the other day, the difference between respectability politics and actually doing the work.
Yeah, and I think we talk about representation, and representation is important, but it's important to also define what you mean as an organization when you're talking about representation. Is it just putting non-white people in spaces that still work under colonialist systems? So for me, it's not just about let's get more non-white people into these spaces. It's about, I mean, you can't get a bunch of non-white people, put them in charge of a faulty ship and say, here, this is what you want to do something with it. It's about using that element of representation as a stepping stone to systemic change, to changing how organizations are run, how organizations enter into relationships with communities that they actually want to reach. And very much breaking down that sort of top-down approach that you were talking about, Natasha, where it's a reciprocal agreement across the board, whether it's the artists you engage with, whether it's the audiences you want to reach. And I can go on about that for hours, but I'll leave it at that for now.
We're running out of time, and I do want to leave some time for questions from the audience. But I'd like to end with asking each of you, if we're looking at an early music ecosystem that is truly diverse and equal and inclusive, what does that look like? Like, what does that end product look like? Sallynee, let's start with you.
I think that since art has always been a reflection of life, that the artists on stage should reflect the society that we live in. So, we live in a global society, especially where early music is. These are diversity with, some cultures, so many immigrants. This is how the stage should look. This is how early music should look.
Thanks. Jennifer, how about you?
I think it kind of goes back to my first statement, my opening statement. I think for early music to be this diverse ecosystem, it has to be this place where people, regardless of their background, regardless of their social standing, regardless of anything, feel welcomed, whether they are an audience member, an artist practitioner, or someone who is working or volunteering within the field. And that, to me, that feeling of belonging and welcoming with any classical music, I think, is just key.
Thank you. Wade, how about you?
I totally just want to say that I have to piggyback off of what Jennifer's saying. I mean, it just has to be more welcoming. And the way that happens is that people see more people that look like them. I mean, for example, most of these groups are mostly strings. I would love to see at least one Black string player in every section, in every group in the country. But that's not going to happen anytime soon because so many of these education programs aren't really doing what they need to do. And then, of course, those education programs aren't sending out diverse people. So then it's like the outreach, it just doesn't work in that regard. But all that's to say is that's what I think would really help, because, so many people come up to me personally after a concert and say, hey, like, I really enjoyed that. Like, I never thought I would really like classical music like that. But like, you get so into it, like the group is so great. But I know that what part of that is that they saw me as a Black person up there. they saw me jamming and grooving in that music and thinking, yeah, this is palpable music. This is cool. I see him jamming. Like, and to me, that's almost more gratifying than, when some of the, I hate to say blue hairs, but, when some of the donors and stuff come to me, because they're probably just regurgitating something they said to somebody else a million times. So, that's the kind of thing that I think is going to help, just seeing it across the board. And again, like you said, across the layers of the cake. It has to start from the top down, right?
Yeah, and when auditions happen on an invitation basis and like tends to invite like, then you don't, there's like a built-in gatekeeping that happens that way that is maybe preventing us from seeing that world have players in every string section of every early possible. Asitha, let's end with you then on that topic before we go to questions.
Sure. In addition to everything that's been said, I think one of the things I would love to see is, and I think every organization would love to see, is more people, more non-white faces in audiences. And that ideally, I mean, that's where every organization wants to go because of changing demographics in society and in our communities today. But I would like for that approach to be a sustained approach and not just the one concert for this community approach. And also an approach, especially when we talk about early music being a smaller community, I'd like to see more hands reaching out across the board to community organizations that are not necessarily classical music organizations that already have a reach into communities that the early music field is trying to reach out to or struggling to reach out to, and take the time to build those relationships and find out what that community wants. At the end of the day, we're producing art. And no one should have to meet a certain standard of knowledge or intellectual excellence, I'll put it that way, in order to interact with art. So that's, I think, as far as expanding audiences is concerned, I think that's the approach I would like to see, so that it's more community-centered and more inclusive of what people from those communities want to experience with their art.
Thank you all so much. We do have a number of questions from the audience. I'm glad to see people are not being shy. There's a question, let's see, from Jennifer Mary Bell, who writes, it's such a privilege to hear this discussion and these moving stories, and thanking the panelists for being here and prevailing. So her question to the panel is, what should or can we do next, and how can we keep the energy that is so evident here alive? And I would just like to jump in first and say that I do hope that the Toronto Bach Festival or any other early music organizations that may be tuning into this, that they don't just leave it at inviting people of color to talk about it, but they actually invite people of color to play on their stage. And I hope to see the names of these wonderful panelists and Mahan as well on the rosters for future seasons at the Bach Festival and other organizations. But who else would like to jump in on that? How to take advantage of the momentum? Yes, Sallynee.
I'd like to say something. So I think that if anything, what we've learned from this pandemic is that arts organizations are very fragile. And so many of the reasons why so many of us are able to continue in any kind of form is because, we can connect with audiences virtually, and we can still bring in these audiences to sustain us in future years. And I think that it's not just about people of color talking about this issue, like we've been saying for this whole hour. Everyone can be an advocate, and especially if you are an audience member and if you want to see more diversity within the audience or on the stage, use your voice, reach out to these organizations on social media. You have so much power. You can demand the change that we're talking about. You can be advocates for us. I think this is how we continue on this road to make progress.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that, I want to say audience has a voice, but I want to also challenge our organizations and our artistic directors or artistic leaders to really understand that they might have to look beyond their noses to find these people. So these musicians are out there. These scholars actually are also out there who can give you information. So you might have to look a little harder to find them if they haven't been in your immediate circles in the past to kind of get this knowledge. But I would also say when you do find them, make sure that you compensate them. So don't just really use the labor of a person of color who maybe has been researching early music in this one area. That knowledge that they have is something they've earned and worked for. So make sure that you are also valuing that labor by compensating those folks.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would like to point out and thank the Bach Festival that all of the panelists here today and myself, we are being compensated for our work and our time. It's very important. And I really appreciate the Bach Festival for serving as a role model in this sense. We have time maybe for one more question. We have a question from Dorothy Milburn Smith, who, in the context of maybe when we were coming up in our fields, not seeing a lot of representation, people who looked like us. So who were your role models? Who really identified your talent and encouraged you? Wade, maybe you can start.
Do you mean just in early music or just the cello in general?
Maybe in
early music,
yeah.
I would say it was really Ken Slowick at Oberlin BPI, who really sort of took an interest in me in 2008, and really just, has always kept an eye on me and has always, really made sure that I was doing the absolute best that I could. When I go to BPI at Oberlin, I'm often, the first to play on the master class, the following day, the first official day. And, Ken will just say to me, "Hey, Wade, can you be ready to play something?" And I'm like, "Sure." Because he knows that, like, not only am I going to have something here, but he's going to be able to do what he needs to do to make it better. And I'm not going to take it a certain way. And that's going to set the tone for the rest of the workshop and the whole class. You see what I'm saying? And so Ken, I would say, really is one of those people who, had just really sort of, again, just been such a great mentor and such a valuable resource for me to really become, a gentleman and a scholar of early music. And of course, I really have to say thank you to Jennifer Bowman here, who hired me so many times for, Folger consort. And, it was just nice to have a sister in the other room. Like, hey, there was just such a lovely moment to just see another face, another beautiful brown skinned person. It just doesn't happen so often. So especially, because Folger Consort is another, group that I really am just so absolutely thankful for. Christopher Kendall and Bob Eisenstein are just hands down phenomenal curators, players, directors, just anything they come out with. I'm just like, do. But all that's to say is, to have them be my first experience is really sort of getting my feet wet in early music, and then have Jennifer be the one to hire me and to be the one, just make sure I had all my music, make sure we all had waters, and just, it's just like, I look over, there she is. It's like, sis, so I would say Jennifer is another one who has really just been one of those people, to always just sort of look after me, make sure I'm. So yes, those two people I would definitely say big thank yous to.
Amazing. So Sallynee, how about you? Who really inspired and encouraged you?
So as a child, growing up, learning modern violin, not quite early music, it was Midori, because at first it was, I mean, my father was a huge supporter of my musical education, and you know, I kind of grew up listening to Midori, but then later on watched her because she's also a like a small Asian woman with small hands, and you know, this is another topic, of course, but I mean, sometimes, you know, physically we have to learn from others, you know. And in terms of early music, it was Yesterday, also BPI. It was such a it was, you know, I went there in the summer between my first and second year master's degree in the States, and it was a revelation. Mark Ken Floyd was there, of course, and just hearing this music being performed the way it was like I had discovered what my calling. And Mark was, you know, he's so encouraging, especially to those who are just starting out, you know, on this journey. And I'll never forget it, and I'll always be grateful for that summer.
Thanks. Asitha, how about you? Who really kind of opened the door for you and said, this is something you could do as a career?
The person I'm thinking about didn't say that explicitly, but it was the person I'm thinking about is my choir master from my chapel choir schoolboy days, who that was where I really fell in love with music, because every single thing we would sing, he would try and equate the interpretation to regular life and things that happen in regular life, and that really helped me make that connection between who I was as a person and my expression as an
I have
artist.
to ask, was he European or was he Sri Lankan?
He's Sri Lankan. Yeah. And the other person I'm thinking of right now is someone who's a wonderful friend and colleague, whom I look up to very much, is Marion Newman, soprano, mezzo soprano, sorry, who always reminds me, especially in the way she approaches things and talks about things, is in this world of expectation where we feel the expectation to fit into certain spaces. She always reminds me, it's enough. You being there, you being who you are is enough. You don't have to present something a certain way or be seen by others a certain way to make your art special and worthwhile being there.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Marion is First Nations, Indigenous Canadian mezzo, wonderful artist. And I guess I'll end with Jennifer, who inspired you and mentored you, whether it was in your performance studies or to make the jump into arts administration.
Yeah, so I think you all gave me time to think. Thank you so much. So first, I just have to shout out my mom, Dolores Bowman, who's probably watching right now or will watch later from Houston, Texas. Hi, Mommy. But she took me to all of the art growing up. And nothing was ever too weird. Nothing was ever too sort of like out of our comfort zone. We would just try it. So, you know, having that foundation of knowing, yeah, go ahead and explore, I think really is like what ended up leading to me to where I am now. From an artistic level, it was watching videos and listening to records of Leontine Price and Jessie Norman, because those ladies never cared if it was really music, classical music, or whatever, they were going to sing it, and I loved it all. And then finally, just two of my teachers who I think have been really influential. Dr. William Summers, who was one of my music professors when I was at Dartmouth College. He's actually the person who I probably would have not been going into arts administration had it not been for him encouraging me to stay in Hanover an additional year just to kind of explore and see what I wanted to do next. And then my voice teacher at Peabody Conservatory, Phyllis Brynjolfsson, who was the first one who was throwing contemporary and early music in my face and having me sing it. And I just discovered a lot of beautiful music that I love even today. So all those people, it's like a big gumbo, kind of brought me to where I am.
Amazing. I would like to thank the panelists. Really, this has been wonderful. And I want to share, you know, what we all said and Mahan said, that just to be in a Zoom chat with Black and brown faces in this area is emotional and wonderful. And I can't believe it's taken this long in my career either to experience this. John, I'm going to throw it back to you to wrap us up. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you very much to our wonderful panelists, Jennifer, Sallynee, Asitha, and Wade, and especially to Natasha for connecting us with such a wonderfully articulate group of people. It's been a very stimulating and thought-provoking conversation. I know it's only the very beginning. We're scratching the surface here, but we have to start somewhere. So thank you very much for all your thoughts and input here. And thank you to all of our audience for joining us today. So long from the Toronto Bach Festival.